Russia's much vaunted new offensive started without huge fanfare and seems to have petered out with little tangible success, but unimaginable scale of losses. This is nowhere more apparent than in the attritional meat grinder confrontations around Bakhmut, Avdiivka and Vhuledar. To win outright or initiate negotiations to end the war, Ukraine will have to avoid the same failures with its expected spring offensive. Can Ukraine surprise the world and, more importantly, the Russian High Command with bold and decisive gains? Has the offensive already begun? And is Russia gearing up for the most catastrophic round of conscription yet, with the rollout of electronic conscription in the major urban centres, not just in the provinces this time, or through marginalised ethnic minorities? Welcome to Silicon Curtain. All our content is also available on popular podcast platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Please like and subscribe to help people find our fantastic speakers. And if you enjoy the content, do please consider supporting us by becoming a patron. Robin Horsfall joined the British Army at the age of 15 in 1972. He served with the Parachute Regiment and 22nd Special Air Service. He left the British Army in 1984 and worked as a mercenary, bodyguard, and as a medical officer in many active war zones around the world. He then built London karate for 20 years, teaching thousands the art and discipline of karate. He retired and went to Surrey University aged 56 and graduated in English literature and creative writing 3 years later. He's the author of several books, including the hugely successful autobiography Fighting Scared, which I highly recommend you read. And of course, as always, we will put links to his website and to his books in the description of the video. Now, Robin, before we begin, I should say this is the third time that I've been privileged to welcome you onto the channel. And it seems that we have some extraordinary timing here because the Ukrainian spring offensive has officially been announced that it has actually begun literally in the last day or two.
Yeah, it is interesting timing because just before that announcement, I announced it. I spend an awful lot of time looking at the general situation and looking at all the outlets that put information out about what's going on in Ukraine. I have a few personal contacts actually on the front there in Ukraine, and they contact me frequently. But it does appear that recently they have been taking out the radar and logistical systems and supply dumps and transport systems in Zaporizhia, in the oblast. And it looked, to all intents and purposes, that was going to be the axis of attack. There have been several assaults along that front over the last 48 hours, and they've been fairly strong and successful. Now, they could be reconnaissance in strength, but they're looking for a weakness. They're looking to identify a focal point where they can concentrate their forces, because in terms of manpower, Ukraine cannot defeat Russia on the basis of a broad front assault. They have to find a weakness, concentrate their forces, and push directly through on a very narrow front, opening up the Russian defenses, getting behind them, destroying their headquarters and logistic routes behind, and then causing a great deal of disarray and hopefully a defeat, so that they can take over large portions of the territory and perhaps even force the Russian military into a collapse and a general retreat. And that's what we all wish for.
I think, yes, well, most people are hoping for that. There are others, we'll come to those later, who seem to have another agenda. But this idea of a full frontal attack, I mean, obviously, I know very little about military strategy, but what I've learned over the last few months is that your ratios go down when you are the attacking force rather than the defending force. And despite Russian disorganization, poor equipment, poor motivation, Ukraine has to be very careful, doesn't it, not to significantly erode the more advantageous ratios they've had in terms of the number of people they lose compared to the Russians.
Yeah, they have to be far more careful with the use of their forces, especially their manpower. But what's happened in the last 14 months is the technological ability of Ukraine has improved as the West has provided higher and higher levels of military technology, and they are using that to very good effect. The statistics usually show that you are going to lose 3 times as many men in offense as you do in defense. So for 14 months, Ukraine has been in defense, and the Russians have probably taken far more than a 3-1 loss, more likely to be a 10-1 loss. The Ukrainian forces have received extra training. They've got Patriot missiles now. They've got long-range HIMARS. They've got all sorts of them. They've been donated the most advanced technologies that are available from the Western powers, and they've got to use this carefully and specifically to overcome the Russian manpower advantage. Russia's mobilizing again. They are trying to bring even more people into the frame, but economically that's very, very difficult to sustain, because the more of the people they draft into their armed forces, the weaker their economy is going to be. The less skilled people, the less capable people they're going to have in their factories to produce munitions. So it's a short-term view, and the military strategists know this, and they know that if they can maintain the supply routes to Ukraine, the high technology to Ukraine, and keep Ukraine powerful and strong and united with the West, then Russia will collapse.
And there's been an interesting development as well, hasn't there, in terms of leadership? Because with all this Western technology, with the huge amount of training and the passing on of NATO techniques, there's the risk as well that Ukraine would be given very solid advice and feel incumbent to follow that advice. But they haven't always done that. So they were advised not to hold on to Bakhmut. They've held on there when so many people were predicting that that would be to their disadvantage. And they seem to have turned that into to call it a meat grinder, I think is true, but it's been far more disadvantageous to the Russians. And it's boosted Ukrainian morale, against the advice, I believe, of many American sort of experts. And even though Vhuledar fell and Vhuledar, they also extracted enormous losses out of the Russians in that sort of attritional defense.
Yeah, I think that an awful lot of experts have voiced their opinion online and said what was sensible and what to expect. I'm not sure that's the same advice they've been given by senior military generals at the highest levels in the USA and in Western Europe. And it's my feeling that it's quite possible that they were advised to fix the Russian forces in those areas while they prepared for their counteroffensive. And they've done that enormously successfully with a huge amount of courage in those areas you just outlined, Bakhmut being the one most people know about. And it also appears that the most aggressive and dangerous soldiers, is a word I wouldn't use for the mercenaries of Wagner Group, have been virtually wiped out in Bakhmut. And so they're no longer a force to be seriously reckoned with. They now need the support of regular Russian conscripted forces. So fixing the Russian armed forces in Donbass, in the east, is actually keeping those assets there and weakening the south, which looks as if it's going to be an advance to Melitopol and to the Dnipro River. That looks like the axis, but the Ukrainians are great at being deceptive. They're great chess players, and who knows, that might not be the case, but it does look strongly like that's the best thing to do. Ben Hodges has said that Crimea is the key to victory, and he explains very clearly why. He says you can defeat all the Russian forces in Donbass, and it won't win you the war. But if you take Crimea, it will. So it does look like that's probably going to be what we're going to see over the next 2 to 3 months.
And in geographical terms, there are a number of obstacles to achieving that goal, aren't there? First of all, you have to get a foothold on the right bank of the Dnipro, which is reputedly, apparently, that was already starting to happen. But to open up a broad front there, that's quite tricky to cross that sort of riverfront. And then the geography of Crimea itself represents all sorts of challenges historically, doesn't it? With very marshy land, which is almost impenetrable, and then a very narrow sort of bottleneck, which there's no element of surprise there. I mean, you come by sea, there's probably huge logistical challenges to doing that. On the land side, you've got very limited options.
Yeah, they don't need to cross the Dnipro to advance in Zaporizhia and take Zaporizhia Oblast, and then they can turn west and perhaps clear the rest of the south of the river, because it would isolate that area. Crimea is a far more complicated story for lots and lots of reasons. Militarily, that isthmus, which is only about 20 kilometers, 30 kilometers wide, if you include the tidal areas, is very difficult for any army to cross because it concentrates you and it can be easily defended. The other side of Crimea is that because of certain population changes over the last, since 2014, but even before that, the majority of the population are Russian speaking, something like 64%. And that makes it a far more difficult place to hold with the support of the people. And it's just my feeling that it might be the plan to isolate Crimea, not to actually invade it, to get to the isthmus, to close the Kerch Bridge, and then to cut off the water supply to Crimea again. And if they do that, it's very difficult for the population there that are pro-Russian to sustain themselves. They can't grow food, they can't get supplies, they can't. The land bridge will be cut off because of if they manage to advance to the Sea of Azov, and so consequently, you know, it's going to that seems to be a very, very likely strategic move. Don't take Crimea, just put it under siege, essentially, cut it off, and then give the options perhaps of a semi-independent Crimea, but not a Russian Crimea. Who knows?
We saw that earlier in the year, didn't we? When they took out sort of the railway line and they took out one side of the carriageway, we saw a huge exodus of Russians who highly suggestive. You know, they're not staying to fight in a patriotic manner. They don't necessarily. They understand that this isn't necessarily their ancestral land or something they're going to fight with all of their sort of heart and soul. Many fled. And I guess Ukrainians could do that again. They could take out half of the Kerch Bridge, and that would allow a huge exodus of, as you say, those sympathetic perhaps to Russia. And I think you touched on a really important nuance here, which Ukrainians would be screaming at the screen that we have to mention, is that, you know, that composition wasn't always the case. And in fact, from the 1940s onwards and from 2014 as well, a huge number of Ukrainians or Ukrainian sympathetic to Ukraine, as well as the Crimea Tatars, they've been forced out. So the population spread you see at the moment is not the historic population of Crimea.
No. There's about 24% of the population are Tatars, and the rest have been imported. But just because, I want to emphasize as well, just because the people are Russian speaking doesn't necessarily mean they're pro-Russian. They're Crimean, they're formerly Ukrainian, and they don't like the idea of coming under the type of government that now exists in Russia. They wouldn't know where they belonged. The freedoms of human beings are being reduced almost daily under the Putin government now. And where will that lead? Will it lead to the collapse of Russia? which is another concern for the Western governments, because I don't think the Western governments want to see Russia collapse. They want to see Putin collapse, and they want to see his troops go home. But the collapse of Russia as a nation is a very, very fragile possibility that can disrupt the economics and the systems that exist in the whole world. Very dangerous.
I mean, that to my mind, and sort of delving into it, is another fallacy almost, in that preserving aspects of the current system out of fear of what might happen will probably in a generation lead to another Putin, if not the replacement of Putin being someone similar. I kind of personally suspect that there needs to be some systemic fragmentation of Russia in order to build up something new from the ground up, because a top-down solution is just going to lead to the same imperialism, the same lies, the same, weaponized mythologies. But as you say, the risk is enormous, as history shows.
You think of that huge landmass, and I've taken this figure out of my memory now, but I think that their population is about 160 million, which is like 2 European countries, 2 West European countries. That's it. That's their entire population for that huge landmass. So, yeah, where would it go if that collapsed? I mean, we saw the collapse of Iraq because there wasn't a full understanding of what you do after a war with an existing government, how important it is to retain it. So, yeah, I think there'll be a tendency for a lot of political strategists to say, look, we don't want to destroy Russia. We just want Russia to go home. And if they can achieve that, then that will be something. That will be something that maybe people say, oh yes, well, they're terribly evil and wicked and they're wrong, and but better the devil you know.
Yes. No, that's been a guiding principle of a lot of foreign policy, hasn't it, for many centuries. And one point you sort of alluded to there is what might cause that fragmentation, and something we mentioned in the intro to this video is a significant changes rolling out as we speak in Russia. Adverts have gone out and apparently are on every channel. They're on billboards. They're on the so-called Z propaganda channels. They're on, channels of the so-called turbo patriots on Telegram or whatever. But this is a series of adverts aimed at not just, the Russian provinces, not aimed at conscription of ethnic minorities who are amongst the most impoverished and repressed. They are now seeking to get a huge influx of conscripts from the urban centers. And of course, for good reason, they haven't wanted to do this before, because if anything's going to foment or force Russians to finally, pick a side or take some kind of action, if only to save their own skins, it is conscription in the more educated urban centers. But it seems that Putin is now going down that route. And if the Ukrainian Spring Offensive starts to show some success, the pressure for all-out conscription will only increase.
Yeah, conscription. I mean, what we've got now in Russia is we've got a dictatorship. Putin's law. Putin's law is Russia. He's surrounded by his sycophants, and he controls the police and he controls the military. But at some point, the casualties that the military are taking is going to have a backlash. It's already, some of those signals are already showing, with soldiers turning around, but they still believe that these being sent to the front without training is a mistake. They're hoping, they still believe that it's everybody else's fault but Vladimir Putin's. Putin, I think, perceives himself as the new Stalin. He's not worried about deaths. He's not worried about his people. He's worried about, he wants Russia to be a great empire, a new Soviet Union again. And there are so many signals that Putin as well is on chemotherapy, that he's sick. I mean, the signs are there. We don't know that. But having experienced chemotherapy myself, they talk about brain fog, chemo fog, and it does affect your brain. You make bad decisions. You can't remember what's going on. You can't read a book. You can't concentrate. And if he is suffering from cancer, then that's going to make him even more impatient, almost similar in style to somebody who's suffering from dementia, frustrated, upset, angry. And he's isolated himself over the past few years as well. So I doubt his competence to make sensible decisions. Hopefully, people around him will manage to persuade him at some point that what he's doing and the pushing forward and carrying on is unsustainable.
I mean, for everything I've seen and heard, even from those who still have some connections inside Russia in, say, the sort of FSB, by all accounts, there is no mechanism anymore to relay those messages. And you saw that at the start of the war with the head of the security services, who was berated publicly by Putin.
Yeah.
I think no one first of all, the system promotes non-entities and sycophants and people who do not have the imagination or, dare I say, the balls to speak out. And as the Stalinist sort of terror intensifies, then those sort of timid characteristics just come to the fore. So I don't think that's going to be a way out. I don't think anyone will talk truth to power at all.
I agree. What has to happen first is there has to be a military victory, and a military victory will undermine its authority, and at some point a general will turn and say, no, that's enough, and we're going to step in here, and there will be some sort of coup. But there has to be the military victory first. Without that, there isn't going to be enough power behind anybody to follow it through. And so that's the first priority of Ukraine and the West. And then once you punch the bully on the nose, then he'll talk, but not before.
And I suspect the lesson from the First World War and seeing the collapse of the political system, which led to the downfall of the Tsar, the first thing that had to happen was the collapse of the morale of the army. So widespread revolts, widespread units sort of disbanding or going rogue or disappearing into the woods. So I suspect the same will be the case here, will be that sort of collapse of order on the front line, I mean, frontline units. And one source I like to listen to is a Russian journalist called Michael Naki, and he has a military expert called Ruslan Lviv, and they do sort of daily commentary on the war. And one of the things that we're talking about today, and I'd love to get your opinion on this as someone who knows about the sort of cohesion of groups of men in a fighting situation. What's happening now is that the Spetsnaz units, the really sort of highly trained troops, have lost up to 80% of their skilled and experienced men. And until recently, the tactic was to have human meat, as it were, waves of human meat, which is the conscripts thrown at the front lines, soften up the Ukrainians, wear down their ammo and strength, and then you send in more experienced troops. Apparently that is now falling apart because they do not have enough experienced troops left. So you have units of raw conscripts with the few experienced, all jumbled up together and being thrown into the melee at the same time. Is that going to work, or is that a recipe for collapse?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard and read that opinion several times. The other thing to take in consideration as a kind of counterpoint to that, though, is that they now have people that have been involved and engaged in combat for up to 14 months. So that gives them a foundation of experienced troops. The survivors have become the experienced troops. Previous to that, although they had trained soldiers, they hadn't seen an awful lot of action. They hadn't been in combat. But yes, they have lost an awful lot of their professional soldiers. And and that weakens them, but they're replacing them with the survivors of the last 14 months. So their experience is growing, which is another important reason to try and achieve this military victory this year, rather than accepting the opinions of some people that this is going to go on and on and on. I often wonder where those opinions come from and which vested interests are putting that out, because sometimes it's I get the feeling that it's bought and paid for to undermine our morale at home.
And that's the only point, isn't it? I mean, before we hit record, we were talking about the sources of voices, and I think, you know, you're watching a couple of hours of this a day. I'm listening to a couple of hours of this in English and Russian on both sort of Russian opposition channels and on the Ukrainian channels, which often will ask the questions in Ukrainian and then they'll have the guests talking in Russian. So it's got an odd kind of experience. But you do start to get a sense of tuning in to when someone is saying something likely to be accurate, and maybe you have to listen to them on numerous occasions to get a real sense of that. But when someone says something out of, whether it be ignorance or whether they are repeating a narrative they've clearly got from somewhere else, it sort of starts to stand out like a sore thumb, doesn't it?
It does, and that's on both sides. It's not just Russian propaganda out there. There's Ukrainian propaganda out there as well. But if you listen to and watch these particular outlets, these particular media outlets over a period of time, you start to realize which ones are just putting out propaganda because there's no evidence to support it. There's no follow-up the next day. Nobody else is reporting what they claim has just happened. And after a while, you start to realize which ones are worth listening to, and you push those to the side and start to get a far better picture and a much more efficient use of your time. But there are people, there are journalists, there are politicians in the Western world who seem to have another agenda. And I suspect that in some cases, that agenda is bought and paid for by Russian money. And I would go so far as to suspect that certain extreme people in the US Congress who are spouting Russian propaganda directly to the people of the United States of America, I would actually ask, show me where their money's come from and show me where their funding's come from, because it doesn't sound very American to me to be speaking out at this time in support of Vladimir Putin.
And it's a really interesting point, because the audience of this channel is around sort of 40% from the US. I think probably more than half of those would class themselves as Republicans, and quite a few would have that sort of label of MAGA, which is quite interesting. And it's quite heartening to find that actually the individuals watching this channel, they may sign up to sorts of things that you and I would not necessarily agree with, but we have found a common ground on Ukraine. And it makes me wonder how something like OAN and Fox News, which repeatedly seem to repeat Russian propaganda narratives, often very thinly disguised and veiled, and they're clearly pitching them at a Republican leading audience, and yet it does seem that in the grassroots there is far more sympathy right across the American political spectrum, and the news in some way is distorting or not actually reflecting what most people actually seem to believe.
Yeah, I think especially in the USA, but in Europe as well, it's viewing figures and the sale of product that is most important. And they've learned that using focus on people's base instincts of fear and jealousy and anger sell more product than the actual truth. There's a vast moral majority in every moderate moral majority, MMMs, in every nation in the Western powers, but they don't seem to have the voice in the national media because these media outlets, especially the private and professional ones, focus on extremism because extremism sells product. It gets people emotional. It gets them to press and click. be scared of this, somebody will click on it. Somebody's going to come and steal your children, they'll click on it. And we're all going to get bombed tomorrow, they'll click on it. And so they use fear as a way of selling product. And that's quite sad, because the people who talk the most sense, the most reasonable people in the world, are having their voice stolen.
And social media, to an extent, the actual mechanics, the algorithms behind social media are essentially, I would say, they're sort of parasitic on those very qualities of fear and terror. The idea not of, to use a popular business term, but they're not built on the idea of abundance. They're built on the idea of scarcity. They're designed to tap into fairly primal fears, because that gets people engaged, as you say, that gets sort of clickbait. And having, the Muscovite in charge of Twitter, that has seen a significant degradation in that platform, and a lot more troll activity, a lot more Russian narratives quite plainly on show on that platform, at least.
Yeah. MSM, you see it every day, and they'll hide beyond the question mark. Will Putin start a nuclear war? Are we all doomed? Will we see the end of the century? And so on. It's hiding behind a question mark. They're not asking a question, they're making a statement. That frustrates me. But just something that came to mind, while a little voice came into my head while you were talking then, and said, yeah, and here in the UK, we've just recently had reports that there's a food shortage. It wasn't. There was a tomato shortage for a week, but it became a food shortage in the media. Oh, we're running out of food. We're all going to starve. Oh, and that's the type of impression that people are being fed constantly. And people who are busy and working and getting on with their lives and looking after their kids and paying their bills, they'll get these little flashes 24 hours a day, and they end up believing stuff that they have no way of supporting. And it's the same system that's being used against people with their feelings about what's going on in Ukraine. And I do my absolute best to try and front that and face it down and say, no, this is what I believe is happening. This is what you should be thinking. And when people do come out with these blatant lies and repeat them as questions, then I'll challenge them.
Unfortunately, in the UK, despite that, the majority of people seem to be, behind the effort to support Ukraine till the end, to do what it takes. And let's turn to Ukraine, because the Ukrainians themselves seem to be extraordinarily hardy and stoical and less, receptive to these sort of hysterical messaging. That doesn't mean there aren't significant challenges on the horizon. And what I'd like to sort of turn the discussion to is, what did Ukraine learn from the offensives in Kharkiv and sort of retaking those sort of territories earlier in the year, Kherson as well? So even though they didn't have to, in the end, physically fight for it, their ability to soften up Russian supply lines made the position in Kherson untenable. So what do you think they have learned over these 12 months that will be deployed in the spring offensive and hopefully, cause it to be successful?
Well, I think that they've learned that Russia, in many aspects, was a paper tiger. They weren't as good as they believed they were, and when they were stood up to, it quickly became apparent that they were disorganized. They had a weak understanding of military science, that their generals weren't capable of running major operations. They were capable of bombing the hell out of civilians in Syria, but they weren't capable of doing anything on this scale with any sense. Their logistical system was poor. Their supply system was corrupt. They were robbing themselves blind, and the evidence of that became clear the more Ukraine stood up to them. And Ukraine also discovered that they could defeat them and they could stop them in their tracks. And over the last 14 months, this has given them an enormous amount of confidence with what's going to happen in the future. So when they do actually start to push forward with their offensive, they're going to not only be fighting for their homeland, but they're going to believe wholeheartedly that they can win. And belief and morale in a war, as Napoleon said, is worth another army. And they have that. They believe they can defeat them. And Russia, the soldiers on the ground, I don't think they believe they can win. They're just hoping to survive long enough to go home.
And when we last spoke, we were still in this mode where the Western powers were supplying Ukraine with equipment essentially to help them survive and hold the Russians at bay. 6 months on, do you think we have supplied them sufficiently enough to actually win?
I don't think it'll ever be enough as far as Ukraine's concerned. They will always be demanding more and more and more. And there's a limit to what especially European countries can supply, because they have to retain enough for their own defense systems as well. But I think everybody realizes everybody in Europe has realized that they're going to give as much as they possibly can. The USA are sending more than everybody else combined, and they're doing a marvelous job. And it's not just a case of sending tanks. You have to send the technical teams. You have to have the maintenance teams to support that over a long period of time. Now, if they can't go into country, they have to train the maintenance teams and the technicians as well. So all the support structures have to be there to go with those tanks, those advanced ammunitions, those aircraft, and so on. Which is in one way like why the West has leaned towards supplying leftover MiGs and Sus rather than supplying advanced Western aircraft. And the other thing, as a slightly counterpoise again, is that there's going to be in some people's minds that they don't want to make Ukraine the most powerful military force in Central Europe as well, without pulling them strongly into the NATO alliance as well. So that's going to be sitting in the back of people's minds. Ukraine combined with Poland could be a great Central European power in their own right. Where's that going to leave Belarus? You know, that's another story too. That's another little distraction sitting there on the northern border. The dialogue between Lukashenko and Putin desperately trying to get Lukashenko to support him in some military fashion, and Lukashenko realizing that perhaps it's not a good idea for him to retain power, because there's a very strong possibility that his people will turn on him if he tries to do that. Well, that's another story. I've gone offline slightly there, but you know,
No, I think
voices in my head.
I think it's very important. I mean, there's a number of interesting things happened since we spoke, and you know, one Russian historian who has often been unfortunately correct, because some of his predictions have been absolutely horrific ones, is Yuri Felshtinsky, and he's very firmly of the belief that if Putin feels he can get away with some kind of nuclear strike, he would launch it from the territory of Belarus. I mean, it's not really very plausibly deniable, but he thinks it may give him plausible deniability. I kind of myself think it's not going to come to that, and the Chinese have lent on him. But I do believe that, and I'm kind of surprised that Ukraine has not tried to do this. I believe Lukashenko will fall the minute Putin falls. And the next front line of the expansion of, you know, European values eastward will come to include Belarus in a couple of years. And that, of course, will freak the Russians out, because then 2 out of the 3 entities which they see as foundational for the Russian Empire, you know, I believe will end up being in NATO and the EU. And geographically, you can see that provides then quite a nice, neat frontier between Europe and Russia.
Yeah, well, Russia will eventually become Russia again, and all the buffer states of the Soviet Union will have gone. And personally, I feel that's got to be a good thing. As far as the use of tactical nukes is concerned, I think that Joe Biden and his government have come out very, very strongly and made it very, very clear that the consequences of such an action would be devastating for Russia. Whether that's convention, and probably conventionally initially, but perhaps the response to that would be, okay, we will now commit NATO to defending Ukraine. So you cannot win that way. And David Petraeus and Ben Hodges have come out quite strongly and said a tactical nuke will not change the battlefield. It'll change world opinion dramatically against Russia. India and China will then turn around and go, right, that's it, you're done, we're done with you. So not a wise move, from my opinion, in any shape or form. I don't think it can do anything positive for them.
No, and they've already tried to weaponize, the nuclear power stations. That backfired. They got a huge amount of pushback when they were doing that. Well, let's turn to one of the more practical challenges that Ukraine had when it rapidly took that territory in not Kherson so much, but in Kharkiv. They were retaking territory probably far faster than they'd expected, and they very quickly, their supply lines became stretched, their troops became exhausted. How do you think Ukraine is planning to avoid that if they do manage to make rapid advances in the coming offensive?
Yeah, their commanders are well aware of the logistical complications of resupplying an advancing army, so they'll have a limit of exploitation, and they will have waves going forward and plans in place to supply those logistics, ammunition, water, food, fuel, and so on. But there'll be a limit of exploitation, and when they achieve that, they'll stop them. And the reason they stop them is because tanks are no good without fuel. Tanks are no good without soldiers, are no good without ammunition or food. So that will be established quite clearly what their objectives are, and they'll be limited. They have to be limited, but they also have to be of strategic value as well. Up in Kherson and down at Kherson and up in Kharkiv, they had a limit of exploitation. They stopped at a certain point and they held that ground very, very successfully. Where they go next has got limits. The crucial thing will be breaking through the enemy front lines, creating mayhem behind their front lines, rolling them up from the flanks, having good air support, having a lot of mobile artillery to keep supporting people, and then hoping for a collapse of the Russian army, and say they may actually vacate an awful lot of land as they cut off their logistics. I mean, soldiers on the Russian side without their supplies are going to simply become prisoners. And so what effect will that have? And politically, will that be enough to bring Putin down? He's a dictator. He rules with fear. Who knows where it'll lead? But first, as I've said earlier, they have to win the military campaign. They have to win the war.
And that just sort of two questions left. One of these relates to what you've just said there, and to pull off such a campaign, it suggests that Ukraine will have had to, broadly speaking, master this combined arms technique, which the Russians have singularly shown that they cannot do. We've seen so many videos and descriptions of them not really using their equipment properly, the tanks not in proper formation, not being supported by infantry. They just, even where they have the equipment, they don't seem to sort of use it in any kind of strategic way. Do you think the Ukrainians have been able to disseminate this knowledge deeply and broadly enough across their forces to really take advantage of those techniques?
Yeah, they do. I mean, since 2014, or maybe even before that, they'd already started to move towards the Western system of warfare, of delegating responsibility, of relying on the initiative of junior ranks to make decisions in combat. Whereas the Russians, the last war the Russians were, real war the Russians were involved in was the Second World War. and their systems there were simply a system of attrition to keep pouring more and more people and our armor into a situation and overwhelm the enemy in the end, and prepared to take losses of 30 million people in order to take Berlin. And it didn't matter how superior the German technology was or how superior the German soldier was, eventually it just swamped them. But they stayed with that. Well, the technology's moved on and the military science has moved on, and we've maintained, the Americans have maintained West Point and other military colleges. We've still had Sandhurst. The Europeans have got their own military colleges, and military science has been taught to almost all the senior officers in those combined armed forces of NATO over many years. So they're far better prepared tactically and strategically to win this war and to know what their advantages are and use them effectively. And because the Russians are so damn predictable, there's nothing new has happened with them in the last 12 months. Nothing new's come out. They haven't changed. The combined operations of infantry, armor, artillery, and air is what's going to focus the strength to punch through the Russian lines and to keep going. It takes an awful lot of money, an awful lot of fuel, and it's going to take an awful lot of Ukrainian blood as well. And we've got to respect them for that, because we're giving them our treasure, and they're giving us their blood. And you know, we've got to admire and respect them for everything they're doing.
And they're very good at not letting the scale of their losses and pain either degrade their confidence, or from a news management point of view, they have been incredibly tight at not letting those stories come out. But if you're connected, say, on Facebook to hundreds of Ukrainians, as I am, and I watch the sort of stories of individuals, you can see that every single day there are funerals taking place. You can see that every family has someone in service or will know of someone who's lost. And also you get this sort of sense of big names, you know, writers, poets, musicians, artists, again, on a weekly basis. You know, some significant cultural or scientific or educational figure from Ukrainian life, it'll be announced that they died at the front. So, you know, it's not statistical, as it were, but it does give you the impression of tremendous losses. And these are Ukraine's best people, whereas we know the Russians are not sending their best people yet.
Well, the Russians have, the best people in Russia have already evacuated the country and run across the border.
Yeah.
Those that aren't dead. It's heartbreaking, the sacrifice that Ukraine has been forced to make because of weak politics in the West over the last decade, and because of the tyranny of Vladimir Putin. And they deserve all our support, not just for the last year, but for the years to come. And when this war is won, they'll need our support to rebuild their country as well. And we should be there for them for that, and including Ukraine into NATO. Not only completes that buffer zone, but Finland and Sweden coming in, is Finland already in, Sweden too coming in, has made the Baltic a NATO sea. And the defeat of Vladimir Putin and the recovery of Crimea will make the Black Sea a NATO sea as well. So there's an awful lot to be gained strategically for the West by continuing to support Ukraine, not just against tyranny, not just against the wickedness of Vladimir Putin, but also for our security and futures as well.
And my last question relates to that, and I know I've asked you on both of our previous interviews, but I just think it's something that the West cannot be weak on, and that is the prosecution of war crimes. And My biggest fear is that Ukraine will win, but we will fail to follow through and hold those who've committed crimes to account. The first time we spoke, I think the atrocities of Bucha were coming to light. The second time we spoke, the torture chambers of Kherson were coming to light. And in the last couple of days, we've been hearing confessions of Wagner officers about sort of well, I mean, no better than the Waffen SS, essentially. I mean, extreme atrocities of utter brutality. Let's end on this. I mean, what do we need to do to make sure that eventually every one of these criminals is held to account?
Well, back to my first premise, we must win the war. Because without winning the war, you have no leverage to get people to The Hague. And a defeated Russia will want an awful lot of support from the West. They'll want the banking system back in line. They'll want to rebuild their economy. They'll want to sell their fuel again. And the price of that should be, okay, we can do that, but we want these people arrested and we want them sent to Holland and we want to be able to try them and lock them up. I mean, the recent massacres, massacre is a correct word in this particular case, that were admitted to by these two Wagner commanders that were given pardons by Vladimir Putin, by the way, included the massacre of children as young as 5, deliberately and knowingly being ordered to do that by Prigozhin. You know, there's no soldiers in the heat of battle or throwing grenades into a room and making a mistake. These people were deliberately murdered and executed according to these commanders and their statements. And if we don't hold them to account when we have the power to do so, then it's an appalling statement as to what the West are prepared to let go. But we have also seen the West, America particularly, accept the murder of a American Saudi Arabian who was taken, chopped to pieces, and then shipped out of an embassy. You know, I mean, that's just unacceptable. And everybody in the world knows who did it. They know who was behind it, and yet he's still in charge of that country. And you know, that's the kind of standards that once we show that we're prepared to do what's expedient rather than what's right, everybody has a price and everybody can be bought. And there are no principles to found our future on. There's no standards of decency for our children to move forward with, our education systems and everything else. Everything will just rely around who gets away with it. And okay, it's okay to do it providing nobody knows. Oh, it's realpolitik and there's nothing we can do. Well, yes, there is, providing somebody has got the guts and the balls and the decency to stand up and say so.
And that gives fuel to Russian propaganda. I mean, we absolutely should not let Russian propaganda and propagandists off the hook. But where we have sort of grotesquely hypocritical actions on our part, and of course the moral, you know, we lost a lot of moral high ground from the second Gulf War when the WMD was shown to not exist, and we have to regain that, as you say, by living our values. And you know, conversation I've had over the last 12 months looked into many techniques of how to counter propaganda and disinformation, and come to the conclusion that yes, you adopt all of these things, including media literacy, but the number one way to counter authoritarianism is to live your values and not be hypocritical to them. Yeah,
decent core values that you're prepared to stand up and say no when all your peer group are saying yes, or this is the wise thing to do, or this is the expedient thing to do. Know what your core values are, because that's what integrity is based on. It's based on your core values. And if you don't have them, and if you're not prepared to stand on them as a leader, as a government, as an individual, then really you don't have anything. You don't have anything to build your character on. And I think we've been lacking character and integrity and dignity in most of the leaders in the Western powers for a long, long time now.
That's an incredibly strong place to end on. I hope the next time we speak, Ukraine will have made significant inroads into the occupied territories. But as always, it's a huge thrill and a privilege to speak to you, Robin. And I really encourage people to read your book because it is absolutely inspiring, and go and hear you speak, because I know you do a lot of speaking events as well. But thank you so much, and Slava Ukraini.
Pleasure talking to you again, John.